everyone, welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin before pursuing a three-way meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump also says he'll try to get back territory for Ukraine during his meeting with Putin on Friday. Washington and Beijing agreed to pause tariff hikes on each other's goods for another 90 days, preventing a tariff surge on the world's two largest economies. Golden, the soundtrack from Netflix K-pop Demon Hunters, has reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making it the 9th song associated with Korean pop to top the charts, and the first by female lead vocalists. We begin in the United States, where President Donald Trump has said he'll hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week in Alaska. The U.S. leader also said that following the talks, he would pursue a trilateral summit with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed on Monday that he would be holding a face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday in Alaska. Trump also raised the possibility of a trilateral summit involving Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after his one-on-one talks with Putin. However, he said while he would be available if needed, he'd prefer a bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelensky. While leaving open the possibility of a trilateral summit, President Trump stated that he would first hear Putin's thoughts and potentially share the details of the meeting with President Zelensky, the EU, and NATO leaders.
I'm going to meet with President Putin, and we're going to see what he has in mind. And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders, and also to President Zelensky. I think out of respect, I'll call him first, and then I'll call them after.
Meanwhile, during a press conference at the White House on Monday, Trump said he'll try to get some territory back for Ukraine during his meeting with Putin on Friday. Trump stressed that Russia has occupied a big portion of Ukraine. The U.S. leader raised the possibility that both Russia and Ukraine would need to make some territorial concessions in order to work out a peace deal, saying that there could be some swapping changes in land. However, Zelensky on Saturday shot down any chance of Ukraine giving up territory captured by Russia in the ongoing war. In a video posted on X, Zelensky said that Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier, adding that his country will not reward Russia for what it has perpetrated. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And the U.S. leader is also delaying a planned hike in tariffs on Chinese goods by another 90 days, extending the deadline to November. He also says tariffs will not be placed on imported gold bars, leading to fall in gold prices. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday extending the U.S.-China tariff truce by 90 days. The move finalizes the outcome of last month's high-level trade talks in Sweden. As a result, U.S. tariffs on China cut to 30% in May, and China's tariffs on the U.S. lowered to 10% will remain in place until early November.
We'll see what happens. China's been, we've been dealing very nicely with China. The relationship is very good with President Xi and myself.
Analysts say any breakthrough is likely to come only after a face-to-face meeting between President Trump and China's President Xi Jinping, possibly on the sidelines of the APEC meeting in Gyeongju, South Korea this October. Trump said in an August 5th phone interview with CNBC that Xi had asked for a meeting and that they would most likely meet before the end of the year if a deal is reached. In a separate announcement, Trump said gold imports will be tariff-free. On Truth Social, the president wrote gold will not be tariffed. The post came after reports that U.S. Customs plan to apply tariffs to 1 kilogram gold bars, news that sent prices to record highs last week. Following Trump's statement, gold futures fell more than 2%, calming earlier market jitters. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So as we just heard, the world's two largest economies are expected to extend their truce on tariffs, while the Trump administration is also planning to impose 100% tariffs on foreign-made semiconductors. For more on how this may affect Korean businesses and the economy, we're joined by Professor Kim Hagun, Professor of Banking and Finance at Texas A&M University Mays Business School. Professor Kim, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for the invite.
So the tariff truce between the U.S. and China was initially set to expire on Tuesday, but it's now been extended for another 90 days. How is this expected to impact the global economy?
So first of all, this pause was somewhat expected in that most of the media said it's not going to be done because obviously President Trump's the negotiation style is in-person meeting. Usually that's when things are done. So it was rather expected, but still this pause actually gives some positive overall effects to at least the U.S. firms and consumers in that this very high tariffs is not going to affect their everyday consumption in the production. But in that sense, there's some different aspects of uncertainty growing because tomorrow morning, inflation data, CPI data is going to be released, and economists have been somewhat warning about the possibility of the surge in July inflation. So maybe market participants think this extension of pause as a guard against some higher inflation released tomorrow. So if that's the case, then maybe inflation is a concern and kind of overall snowballing can actually happen. So maybe people actually are worried a bit about this kind of angle as well.
I see. And eyes are now on whether Korean chip makers will be impacted by the Trump administration's new tariff on semiconductors. Will Samsung Electronics and SK hynix be exempt from them as they're building plants in the United States? And what do the tariffs mean for the prices of electronic devices like smartphones and computers?
Yeah, so on the first question, I think, we don't know yet because Mr. Trump's actually comments are somewhat always pivotal and non-committal, but the Samsung and SK hynix are likely to be exempt from this Trump administration proposed 100% tariff on semiconductors because obviously, as you mentioned, they have invested heavily in the U.S. and also committing to building a new factory for SK hynix. So as long as this is not too narrowly defined in terms of the domestic production, I think both Samsung and SK hynix are well prepared. So in that sense, I think it is fine. But we have to see what's going to happen in terms of the finalizing this deal. In terms of this meaning of the tariffs, obviously our daily lives are completely depending on the electronics such as smartphone, TVs, and internet-based machines. So in that case, semiconductors are going to be extremely important. Therefore, the prices of consumers and also producers actually will eventually go up. So the most important effect is going to come through the inflation. So here's kind of the deal. So the smartphone prices or the TV prices or a car price is not going to go up instantly just because semiconductors go up in terms of price. But at some point when the new products are released, the firms will eventually adjust this price to increase. In that case, consumers, if they buy it at higher prices, then that means they have to have this burden of higher prices. If they decided to resist and not buying it, then I think firms have to absorb this. That means the recession is going to be more likely. Therefore, we will see the stagflation. So that's going to be the overall impacts actually of this huge tariffs on semiconductors because it's so important in our daily lives nowadays.
Right, and it was recently unveiled that Samsung Electronics will supply chips to Tesla and Apple from its new facility in Texas. What do you think drove these tech giants to select the Korean chip maker, and how might these deals help Samsung regain ground against its biggest competitor, TSMC?
Right. So obviously in case of this, the Apple, I think this is image sensor, and this was almost monopolistically produced and supplied by Sony, I think, in Japan. So from Apple's point of view, having more diversified suppliers, especially for this type of important parts, I think in terms of earning the bargaining power, therefore they can lower the price, etc. definitely just using Samsung into this ball game, I think it's going to be very important for their own perspective. At the same time, because of the tariffs, semiconductor part being exempt is going to be heavily dependent on the domestic production, and Samsung already has started and has this Taylor factory, I think. So this is going to be definitely helpful for Apple. For Samsung, obviously, like a perennial second place of this foundry business compared to TSMC. So clearly it's a small step, but I think it's going to be a very important step for the Samsung to regain ground. For the same reason, Tesla's actually domestic sort of production in cooperation with Samsung is going to be very important so that the Tesla can actually diversify its production scale, not just depending on or relying on TSMC.
I see. And it's not just for semiconductors, but Trump also said he'll initially impose a small tariff on pharmaceuticals, but said it could eventually reach up to 250%. How must Korean companies prepare for this measure?
Yeah, so I think this one's probably going to have like more step up, increase in tariffs. So hopefully Korean companies actually have time to cope with this type of the tariff increases. I believe the big pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca or like these Roche, they do have the U.S. facilities to produce. So I think hopefully the Korean pharmaceutical companies, SK Bio or like Samsung Bio, actually have room to do this. Of course, that's an eventual increase in cost, but to cope with this kind of things, having more diversified the production facility is going to be a good deal. Another sort of important part is the Korean, the medicine prices are extremely cheap. So I think this can be used as some leverage from the U.S. side in terms of negotiating like increases in the medicine price in Korea actually using this. So that part, I think we have to wait and see how this is going to play out in the future.
I see. All right, Professor Kim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
With the tariff deal now behind them, the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. are looking ahead to what could be their first ever summit within this month, which would reshape the two countries' security alliance, says Victor Cha, the Korea chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Our Kim Jung-sik reports.
The tariff deal announced late last month may have dominated headlines, but for veteran Korea watcher Victor Cha, its biggest impact is on the agenda it clears the way for.
Now that this has kind of been at least in a framework agreement stage, that really opens up space for the two leaders to talk about all the other things that are important in the alliance. They can get back to talking about the issues that matter on security, on the military, on defense and deterrence.
That, he says, could set the stage for adjustments not just in policy, but in the alliance itself.
I think they will. There will be some changes coming to the alliance. We've already seen them on the economic side, but there could also be some coming on the security side.
Could you give us an example on what changes could come, and like if you can just predict?
We know very clearly that President Trump wants Korea to pay more for the stationing of U.S. forces in Korea. On the Korean side, the Lee government, progressive governments in general, have been very focused on trying to return OPCON transition. So that's something that could certainly come up. And President Trump has made no secret of his desire to reduce the U.S. military footprint in Korea, and including the number of ground troops that are in Korea. So those are three big areas where we could see potential change.
Dr. Cha says any troop drawdown could be part of a broader alliance modernization, pairing fewer ground forces with more air and naval power and stronger South Korean intelligence and surveillance.
If that's all packaged together as part of a dual effort to modernize the alliance, then I think you don't have any problems. Then I don't think you hurt deterrence, you strengthen the alliance.
But he warns that acting without consultation could have the opposite effect.
But if the United States just starts doing this unilaterally, just starts pulling forces unilaterally without much consultation, that can weaken the alliance and can also create miscalculation or misperception by the North Koreans and the Chinese that the alliance is weakening.
Still, he says a trade deal opens the door for talks on key security issues, and their first meeting could determine whether the allies move toward a stronger, more modern security partnership. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
On the local front, South Korean President Lee Jae Myung has issued his Liberation Day special pardons. The clemency list spans high-profile politicians, business leaders, and members of the public. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin has the details.
With South Korea's National Liberation Day on Friday, the customary presidential pardons have been announced. At an extraordinary cabinet meeting on Monday, clemency was granted to 2,188 people.
This round of pardons is aimed at responding to the call for national unity, creating an opportunity to overcome division and conflict, and revitalizing the struggling economy amid global uncertainty.
At the center of attention is Cho Guk, former head of the Minor Rebuilding Korea Party. Cho, who served as Justice Minister and senior presidential aide to former President Moon Jae-in, has been serving a 2-year prison term since last December for academic fraud involving his children and unlawfully interfering with a government-led corruption inspection.
The Rebuilding Korea Party is an opposition party, and Cho Guk is not a close associate of President Lee. In fact, he's among those whose pardons were widely requested by figures from various political and religious circles.
Pardoned with the restoration of rights, Cho can run for public office again, with the speculation that he may enter the 2026 local elections. Also among the 27 pardoned politicians is former lawmaker Yoon Mi-hyang, convicted of embezzling funds from a civic group supporting Korean wartime sex slaves known as Comfort Women. The main opposition People Power Party blasted the pardons as a, quote, reward for regime change. The pardons this time also aim to boost people's livelihoods.
We expect pardons for key business leaders to help create jobs and drive dynamic growth, while clemency for small business owners and self-employed workers will support stability and recovery in the local economy.
Notable names include former SK Network's chairman and CEO Choi Shin-won. Others include those who were sent to labor facilities for failing to pay court-imposed fines, as well as taxi and bus drivers. The first round of pardons under the new administration will take effect this Friday. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
A Seoul court is holding a hearing today on whether to arrest former First Lady Kim Keon Hee, the wife of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. She faces allegations of stock manipulation, interference in party nominations, which she denies. Prosecutors argue that there is a high risk she will destroy evidence. A decision could come as early as tonight, and if granted, it would mark the first time in the country's history that a former president and first lady are detained at the same time. A song from an American animated film about Korean pop stars is now topping the U.S. charts. According to Billboard on Monday, Golden from Netflix KPop Demon Hunters hit #1 on its Hot 100, making it the 9th song associated with Korean pop to top the charts, and the first by female lead vocalists. During the first week of August, the song garnered more than 31 million streams, representing a 9% increase from the previous week, while radio play surged 71%. The Hot 100 ranks the most popular songs across all genres in the U.S., based on streaming, radio airplay, and sales. The song also topped the British official singles Top 100 earlier this month.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting in the United States, President Donald Trump has declared a public safety emergency in Washington, D.C., placing the city's police under direct federal control. At a White House press conference on Monday, President Trump also announced the deployment of 800 National Guard troops. Trump stated the move was to reestablish law, order, and public safety in the Capitol. He referenced the emergency powers granted by the D.C. Home Rule Act, which allow him to federalize the Metropolitan Police Department, bypassing elected city leaders. Attorney General Pam Bondi was appointed to oversee the federalized police force. National Guard troops are expected to arrive by the end of the week, with between 100 and 200 deployed at any given time to assist the police. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser described the president's actions as unsettling and unprecedented, asserting that the city is not experiencing a crime surge and that violent crime is at a 30-year low. The United Nations has strongly condemned a targeted Israeli airstrike that killed 5 Al Jazeera journalists in Gaza on Sunday, calling it a serious breach of international law. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the killing and demanded an independent and impartial investigation into the incident, according to his spokesperson on Monday. Al Jazeera labeled the attack a blatant and premeditated assault on press freedom, asserting that it aimed to silence those documenting the impending occupation of Gaza. The U.S.-based Committee to Protect Journalists urged accountability and denounced Israel's repeated claims of Hamas affiliation as justification for targeting journalists. According to reports, at least 242 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said on Monday that Australia will formally recognize a Palestinian state at the upcoming UN General Assembly in September, aligning with similar commitments from France, the UK, and Canada. The decision is conditional on key assurances from the Palestinian Authority, including excluding Hamas from any governing role, demilitarizing Gaza, and holding democratic elections. Meanwhile, New Zealand's foreign minister said his country was also considering recognizing Palestinian statehood and would make a formal decision in September. Finally, in China, a robot band comprised of 5 autonomous humanoid robot musicians will debut at the opening ceremony of the World Humanoid Robot Games in Beijing on Thursday. The ensemble, engineered by Hefei Panxi Technology, will include a keyboardist, lead guitarist, drummer, bassist, and rhythm guitarist, and will use a shared computing system that processes musical scores in real time to coordinate movements. Engineers have upgraded pneumatic joints with faster motor-driven ones to handle quicker rhythms during their performance, which will feature traditional folk songs.
Those in southern regions need to brace for more rain today. A strong band of rain clouds is moving over the south coast and areas of Gyeongsang-do provinces, with a heavy rain advisory being issued in Jeollanam-do province this morning. So most of the southern provinces will get 5 to 40 millimeters of rainfall. The Chungcheong-do area might get 5 to 10 millimeters through tonight. And the breeze in the morning and evening these days is definitely unusual for this time of the year. Even the afternoons were quite bearable. However, those of us in the northern regions of South Korea will have highs soaring to the low 30s again. Seoul, Chuncheon both topping out at 33 degrees Celsius this afternoon under mostly sunny skies, but Daegu, Gyeongju topping out at just 28 degrees. And as for tomorrow, the central regions will see downpours. Seoul and Gangwon-do province might receive up to 100 millimeters of heavy rain tomorrow. The rain looks like it will continue in the capital area through Liberation Day morning. However, the heat looks to get strong again this weekend. Take care.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.